Today, I'm going to be getting my home automation system set up. For my main automation controller, I use Home Assistant. To handle MQTT messages, I use Mosquitto, and to connect to my Zigbee devices, I'll be using Zigbee to MQTT. This is just going to be a very simple setup. I'm not worried about connecting to anything over HTTPS or external to my network. Later on, I'll be enabling it using an app called Traffic, but if you're just getting things set up for the first time, keep it easy, make sure it works, and then expand it out from there. So the first thing I want to do after logging into the TrueNAS web interface is to go to System Settings and select Shell. This will give us a shell terminal as if we were physically connected to the TrueNAS server. The default option when deploying an app on TrueNAS is to use their built-in PVC or Persistent Volume Claim. This sections off a bit of your hard disk to store configuration information, so whenever you update an app, you don't completely have to reconfigure it. The downside to this message is the PVC is deleted when you delete the app. So if you're getting some settings wrong and need to completely recreate the app from scratch, something that may have come up to me occasionally, there's a bit of extra footwork required to get it back up. I'll be creating a directory on a pool I set up earlier for each app and telling the app to use that directory for persistent storage. So in the shell terminal, I created a folder called Apps in the pool I previously created called VM Storage. Then in the apps folder, I'm going to make 3 directories, one for each app I'm going to install. So that's a folder for Home Assistant, a folder for Mosquitto, and yes, is spelled with 2 T's for the app, and a folder called Zigbee to MQTT. It technically doesn't matter what you name them, but I like to keep things simple, so I'm using the same name as the app. Then, in each directory, I make 2 folders, one called Data and one called Config. Now, not every app uses both directories, but I don't want to waste time coming back to the shell terminal after confirming what the app needs. And I highly recommend using a dedicated data folder and a separate dedicated configuration folder. I have noticed on apps that use 2 separate folders, things can break if you point both folders to the same location. Okay, next we need to add in the Truecharts app repository into TrueNAS. Truecharts offers a lot more apps than the built-in repository. Plus, they have an active Discord server with very helpful members who can help you fix all the boneheaded mistakes you make that broke your system. Not that I'm speaking from personal knowledge or anything. To add in Truecharts, go to Apps, then click on Manage Catalogs. You can see I've already added it in, but what you'll want to do is click on Add Catalog and click on Continue when they throw up a generic warning message. You'll have to name this catalog. I'm unimaginative, so I'm calling it Truecharts, as you can see. For the repository, you'll want to enter this URL. It's down in the description area of this video as well if you just want to copy and paste it from there. For trains, enter stable, and for branch, enter main if they're not auto-populated. Other values can go here if you want to try out unstable dev branches, but for the most part, just leave it at these values. Once it's added in, it should automatically download the available charts, but if it doesn't, click on Refresh All. Once it's done updating, head to Available Applications. You'll now see a lot more than there was previously. I'm going to start off by installing Home Assistant, so in the search bar, type in Home. That'll be enough to get it pulled up. It will show you the apps that have the word Home in their title, and here you can see there is a Home Assistant from the official chart source, as well as one from Truecharts. Click on Install for the Truecharts option. We'll be using them for everything here. It may take a moment to process the available options, but when it's done, a sidebar is going to pop up listing the configuration options available to this app. For the application name, I suggest just copying and pasting the official app name. I typed it in here and forgot the dash. This doesn't make a big difference one way or the other, but it helps keep things straight. Go ahead and keep the defaults, making sure to select the correct time zone you're in if you haven't already set it in the General Settings under System Settings. The next thing I'm going to change is under Storage and Persistence. I'm going to change the type of storage from PVC Simple to Host Path Simple. Then I'm going to browse through the file directories until I get to the folder I set up previously and select it so it's displayed in the host path. I'm going to leave everything else at their default settings and click on Next until I get to Summary, then click on Save. At this point, a new app will be deployed. You could see it over in installed applications, but I also want to get Mosquitto set up as my MQTT broker, so I'm going to search for it in available apps and install the Truecharts version. For app name, I'm going to foolishly type it out instead of copying and pasting it like I should, but at least I remember that Mosquitto is spelled with 2 T's for this app. After making sure my time zone is right, since I hadn't changed it in my system settings yet, I'm going to accept the defaults until I get to app configuration. I want to set authentication to enabled. This will require any device connecting to my MQTT broker to enter a valid username and password. It's a very basic level of security that I highly recommend for your automation network. It will take just a couple of extra steps to set up, but it's worth it. If you do not check this box, it will allow you to log in anonymously. Click Next until you get to Storage and Persistence, then optionally set the persistent directory path. Again, this is just a preference of mine. There are pros and cons for using either basic option, and everything will still work if you choose to use the default PVC setup. Click through accepting the defaults and then click on Save to deploy it. Head over to the Installed Apps area, and once Mosquitto is deployed, click on the ellipses in the top right-hand corner of it and launch the shell. It's going to ask you which pod and container you want to connect to. For some apps, like Home Assistant, it installs two unique containers, one for an SQL backend and one for Home Assistant itself. You can see how many it uses by looking at the area that says Active. For Home Assistant, it says Active 2/2, but for Mosquitto, it just says Active. I don't need to change anything here, so I'm just going to click on Choose. Once connected, you need to issue the command to create a user for MQTT and give it a password since we've enabled authentication. You're going to want to use this command to accomplish this. The -C option tells it that we're going to create a new user. The directory that ends in password.txt says we're going to store the password in this file at that location. It's important to use the /mosquitto/configinc directory, as that is the path to the persistent files on your host. At the end of it, we're going to put MQTT User. This is going to be the user that we create. You can use any username you like, just be sure to write it down along with the password you set up. Now, if you try to connect to the Mosquitto MQTT broker, you would find that you cannot connect with the username and password you just set up. That's because Mosquitto doesn't know what the password is for this user account yet. You need to tell it to use the file you just created. To do this, we need to add our own custom configuration to the persistent configinc directory. Make sure that you cd into /mosquitto/configinc, then enter this command. This will create a configuration file named passwordconfig.conf and add the line password_file/mosquitto/configinc/password.txt to it. Mosquitto will automatically parse any instruction from a file that ends in .conf in the configinc directory and load in the password for your username. You'll need to reload the Mosquitto service to get it to read the new configuration settings, or just stop and then start the app again. With Mosquitto set up, I want to get it integrated into Home Assistant. Go to the installed apps and click on the Open button for Home Assistant. It's my first time loading it, so I'm going to set up a user account, then enter my localization information. I live in the Central Time Zone, around 222 meters above sea level, and I use the inferior imperial system. That's right, I said it! To add the Mosquitto integration, go to Settings, select Devices and Services, click on Add Integration, search for MQTT, and then select it. It's going to prompt you for the path to the MQTT broker, the port to connect to, the username, and password you set up. TrueNAS Scale apps cannot be accessed directly by their IP addresses. Instead, you need to use their internal domain name. This is one of the reasons why I recommend copying and pasting the official app name as your app name when creating the app. As long as you did that, the internal domain name will be the name of your app.ix-the name of your app.svc.cluster.local. So for Mosquitto, that would be Mosquitto with 2 T's, .ix-mosquitto with 2 T's, .svc.cluster.local. But what if you named it something like Bob? In that case, it would be the name you made, then a dash, then the official app name, .ix-the name you made, .svc.cluster.local. So if you named your Mosquitto app Bob, this would be your internal domain name. If you don't follow how to figure out the internal domain name, head to this site and read the description there. As always, there's a link to it in the description of this video. I didn't change the default port when I set Mosquitto, so it's still port 1883. Then I'll enter my username and password I made just a minute ago and hit submit. As long as you've done everything right, you'll get this message box saying success! If you get a fail to connect, make sure that you've entered all your information correctly and that you've restarted the Mosquitto app or service to load in the password file information. Alright, so now Home Assistant is set up to send and receive MQTT messages using the Mosquitto MQTT Broker app. But currently, nothing is sending it messages. Both TrueNAS and Home Assistant have no built-in ability to talk using the Zigbee or Z-Wave or Matter wireless standards. To make it work, you have to have an appropriate adapter for your system, or multiple adapters if you're mixing technologies. For my home automation, I'm currently using just Zigbee devices, so I purchased a Sonoff 3.0 USB adapter to communicate with my Zigbee network. At this point in time, you want to make sure you purchase something that uses the CC265 chipset to talk to Zigbee devices. It's one of the newer chipsets out there. Now, older chipsets will work with 90% or more of the Zigbee devices out there, but if you're setting up this fresh, you might as well purchase something that's a little more future-proof. If you do get the Sonoff Zigbee 3.0 USB adapter like I have, and am enjoying very much, you might want to update its firmware before using it. Here's a link to the video I watched to do this. Now, newer devices may already be up to date and not require any flashing. With my adapter plugged into the server, I need to figure out what port it's been mapped to so I can pass that port into the app I'm about to make. To do this, go to System Settings and select Shell. Once in there, enter this command, which will be down in the description area if you don't want to copy it off the screen, to find the port the USB adapter is connected to. You can either make a note of the /dev/tty USB numbers connected to, or copy the entire serial ID, which for me starts with USB and ends with port 0. The latter is frankly impossible to remember, but if your adapter were to suddenly mount to a different port after another USB device was added to it, after a reboot let's say, the app would continue to work without any issues because the serial ID remains unchanged. I'll show you how to set it up both ways and you can decide which is best for you. Now that I know what port I'm using, I'm going to go back to available applications and install Zigbee to MQTT. Now if you're not using Zigbee, this basic method will still work for you, you just need to make sure that you choose the appropriate app. There's one for connecting Z-Wave devices, another for Amcrest or Leaf to an MQTT broker. For the app name, I'm going to again type out the exact same name as the app instead of copying and pasting because apparently I enjoy setting myself up for mistakes. Then I'm going to click on Next and Next again on controller settings. For container configuration, I'm going to enter the MQTT username and password I set up with Mosquitto, and I'm going to uncheck the Zigbee MQTT_config_permit_join. If you leave this box checked, then every Zigbee device that wants to join your network can join your network. This might sound convenient when you're setting up an entire Zigbee network, but it is a huge security threat if you forget to turn it off afterwards. It's better just to turn it off now and manually turn it on in the Zigbee to MQTT app whenever you need it. Under MQTT server, enter the same internal domain name you used in Home Assistant, which, if you're using the same settings as I am and named your Mosquitto app Mosquitto with 2 T's, then leave the MQTT:// at the beginning of the URL and then enter mosquitto.ix-mosquitto.svc.cluster.local. If you want to change the basic topic name for your MQTT messages, you can, but I'm going to leave it as the default. Make a note of what is in the field Zigbee to MQTT_config_serial_port. This is not the device path to the physical port your adapter is plugged into on your server. This is asking what is the port internal to the app that you have connected your adapter to. Later on, we're going to map the adapter to an internal port, and we need to make sure that they match. I'm going to leave it as the default /dev/tty USB 0 and copy it so I can paste it into the correct field later on. Click on Next, and Next again. If you're setting the persistent storage to a folder on your host, go ahead and map it, otherwise just click on Next. We're not going to worry about ingress yet, so click on Next. Same with security and permissions, just keep clicking Next. In Resources and Devices, this is where we need to map the physical port that has our USB adapter into a set port in the app. So click on Add to configure Mount USB Devices. Make sure the Enable the Storage box is checked and the Read-Only box is unchecked. If it's read-only, you'll only be able to see the status of your Zigbee devices, but you won't be able to control them, which kind of defeats the purpose of a smart home. For the host device path field, enter the device path the adapter is connected to on your host that you made a note of earlier. This could be either /dev/tty USB and then a number. Alternatively, if you want to connect to it using its static, unchanging serial ID, then enter /dev/serial/by-id/ followed by the serial ID you copied earlier, which, for the record, isn't what I'm showing on the screen, but it is how I set mine up and works perfectly. In the container device path field, enter the same path that you copied down earlier from the Zigbee to MQTT_config_serial_port field. Then click Next, Next again, and save to deploy it. If there's any issue communicating with the adapter, the app will fail to deploy. Open the logs and see what error message it's giving you. Now for me, I had already set up the app previously and deleted it so I could make this video. As a result, it thought I was trying to create 2 Zigbee networks using the same PAN ID, which would have created just tremendous issues. You can see the error message tells me that I need to remove my coordinator backup file to recommission my network. So I'm going to jump into the shell terminal and delete it. Now, I could be patient long enough for it to start up after fixing the error, or I can manually stop then start the app again. Either way, once all the errors are taken care of, you will see that it's set to active, and I can open the web interface and see if it's up and running. I could click on Permit Join All and start adding devices, but let me encourage you to make 2 changes first. Under Settings, then Advanced, check the Zigbee channel that's being used. Zigbee operates in the same frequency range as 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi, so if you choose the wrong channel, it can gum things up. Thankfully, as more and more people adopt 5 GHz, this will clear up some of the 2.4 GHz congestion. This setting has to be changed before you start adding Zigbee devices. If you change it, your network will break, and this can lead to some very annoying repairing of devices, especially if you're using devices that are tucked away behind light switches. I like to use Zigbee channel 25. It's at the far end of the 2.4 GHz range here in America, so even if you're using Wi-Fi channel 11, the two tend to play nicely together. Zigbee to MQTT uses a known default encryption key, so while you're in here, you might also want to consider scrolling down and changing it by adding a network key array. The network key encryption size is 128-bit, so this will be a 16-decimal number between 0 to 255, or hexadecimal numbers between 00 and FF. Just choose it at random. It doesn't make things impenetrable, but it's a nice security step. You don't need to worry about memorizing this key. First of all, it's stored, sadly unencrypted, in your persistent storage location in the file configuration.yaml. Secondly, when Zigbee devices join, they are automatically given this key, which is another reason to make sure you don't leave your devices in join mode all the time. So with that out of the way, you can finally start adding your Zigbee devices. Make sure you start with any Zigbee routers you'll be adding. Devices that are powered by mains voltages tend to be routers, while devices that run off batteries definitely are not routers. I'm using a bunch of Sonoff ZB Minis to control my light switches, so I should start with them. But I also have an IKEA transfer button that will sit on my desk in the room adjacent to my server and Zigbee USB adapter, so I'm going to pair that one first just to test things. One thing to know about Zigbee is it doesn't always work the first time. I noticed that with my IKEA transfer motion detectors, I had to add it several times for it to pair correctly. Also, you just need to be patient. With battery-powered Zigbee devices, they don't send out constant messages. It may take several minutes for it to interview successfully. I'm going to give the device a name a little more descriptive than its ID, and add some descriptions explaining what the button presses will do. Now that I've added a device, I want to make sure that Zigbee to MQTT is actually receiving the Zigbee messages. So I'm going to go to Logs and trigger some Zigbee events by clicking my button a few times. Awesome! Now that I see it's working here, I need to jump over to Home Assistant and make sure it's showing up correctly there. Now for some reason it wasn't getting messages when I first went into Home Assistant, and I failed to record the fix, but I do remember that the solution was just to reconfigure my MQTT integration. Once I did that, I had to go back to Zigbee to MQTT and repair those 2 buttons I had previously added. But with that, every new device I paired in Zigbee to MQTT was detected automatically in Home Assistant. Which is why I do advise testing 1 or 2 devices before pairing every device you've set up. As long as you can see the device in your MQTT integration, its events are ready to be seen by Home Assistant. But you can test this by going to Developer Tools, clicking on Events, and subscribing to all events by entering an asterisk, then click Start Listening. Trigger one of your Zigbee devices and you'll see a new event pop up. The next video about this will be about adding iframes to Home Assistant and setting up ingress to our containers so we can connect our apps from Home Assistant using secure HTTPS. So until the next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.